class, we'll share a few thoughts about Thanksgiving, because this is our class before Thanksgiving. And if you like, you could share this Dvar Torah that I'll share at the end at your Thanksgiving table to bring a little Torah perspective into the Thanksgiving celebration. But before we get to the end of the class, which will focus a little bit on Thanksgiving, let's look at our Torah portion, which is Parshah Toldot. Again, if you're in the Art Scroll Chumash, it's on page 124. If you're in any other Chumash, it's chapter 25 of Genesis, verse 19. So we all know this Jewish family began with Abraham and Sarah, the founding father, a patriarch, a matriarch of the Jewish nation. And of course, they passed away in last week's Torah portion. So now we go to the next link in the chain, which is Isaac. Now, just that you know, in Judaism, we have a word called Misorah. Misorah means the transmission. You know, if you ever studied Pirkei Avot, how does all of ethics of our fathers begin? Moses received the Torah at Mount Sinai from God, and he transmitted it to Joshua, and Joshua to the elders, and the elders to the prophets, and the prophets to the members of the Great Assembly. Judaism is a chain, and every one of us, the most important thing we can do in life is be a faithful chain. You know, one link in the chain is broken, that's the end of the whole chain. And hence the term, the weakest link. We have to make sure that we are strong links in the chain of Judaism. And as the word Misorah means, the transmission. Isaac is the first Jewish child, which means he is charged with being the transmitter of everything he learned from his parents, Abraham and Sarah, to all subsequent generations. And Abraham and Sarah only had one child, Isaac. Or I should say one Jewish child from Sarah. Abraham, a second child from Hagar. But Sarah and Abraham only fathered and mothered one child. So all of Judaism was dependent on this one child. And Isaac, from all the patriarchs, is not considered the most dramatic personality. In other words, when you look at him, if I ask you how many stories do you know about Isaac? Well, you know that he was taken by his father to be bound as a sacrifice, the binding of Isaac, which is to his great credit that he went along with his father. People think, oh, he was just passive, he went along. No, he willingly was prepared to allow himself to be sacrificed. But outside of that, you know, unlike Abraham, who got a name change, Avraham, he got the letter Hey, and Sarai became Sarah. Unlike Yaakov, who wrestled with an angel and got a new name, Yisrael. Unlike Abraham, who traveled around to Egypt, and all these different stories of his wife being abducted, and Jacob, who had to run away to Laban's house. And, you know, Isaac seems like he had a very straightforward life. There doesn't seem to be a lot of, you know, Jacob, we have the story of the ladder and the angels going up and down the ladder. And Abraham, we had all the 10 trials, Lech Lecha, go to the land that I was. Isaac doesn't seem to get as much attention or screen time in the Torah. And yes, there are stories about Isaac that we'll discuss, obviously, but he doesn't seem as significant or as important as Abraham and Jacob, for example. But the truth be told, that, you know, everyone wants to be a leader. Everyone wants to be a founder or a pioneer or but Isaac was a follower of his parents. And he teaches us a very, very important message. And that is that the most important thing in Judaism is to be that link in the chain between his parents, which were Abraham and Sarah, and the subsequent generations onto his son Jacob, who then fathered the 12 tribes of Israel with his wives. So we're going to learn all about Isaac in this week's Torah portion. And the Torah portion begins, this is the story or the genealogy of Isaac. And it tells us right away in the opening verse, he was the son of Abraham. And then it says, Abraham begot Isaac. Now, right away on this opening verse, Rashi is very troubled. because again and again, we know the Torah has no extra words. Everything is precise and concise. So listen to the opening verse. This is the story of the offspring, the genealogy, the descendants of Isaac. Who was Isaac? The son of Abraham. And then the verse says, Abraham begot Isaac. If you say that Isaac is the son of Abraham, there's no need to say that Abraham was the father of Isaac. We get it. Isaac was the son of Abraham. That implies that Abraham was his father. Why the repetition? And Rashi's classic answer is as follows. Rashi says, when Abraham and Sarah gave birth to Isaac, there were rumors. We think only today we have tabloids and, these different gossip shows. Well, they didn't have gossip shows back in the day, and they didn't have gossip columnists in the newspaper. They didn't have tabloids, but they still had gossipers. And there were gossipers going around. And you know what they were saying? You're not going to believe this. They were saying something so despicable. They were saying, this baby that was born to Sarah, there's no way Abraham's the father. Abraham was 100 years old. What they said was, you remember when Sarah was abducted to the palace of Avimelech, the king of Gerar? Remember that story? And then God plagued him and he returned his wife to Abraham. Abraham had to say it was his sister. He said, people started spreading rumors that the father of Isaac was really Avimelech. Avimelech must have been intimate with Sarah when he abducted her. And that's how Isaac was born, because there's no way Abraham at 100 years old is the father. So in order to diffuse and repel these horrific rumors saying that Abraham didn't give birth with Sarah to Isaac, God made the face of Isaac to be a spitting image of his father Abraham, so that anyone who looked at Isaac said, there's no question his father is Abraham. Look at them. They're perfect resemblance one to another. And what this Rashi teaches us is a number of lessons. The first lesson is how bad gossip and false rumors can be, that you could cause so much humiliation and shame and harm to a person by spreading rumors. That's number one. Number two is that rumors don't always have to make sense. Gossip doesn't have to make sense. People enjoy gossiping because it's entertaining to laugh at other people sometimes. So they don't even necessarily have to be rooted in any logic. Why? Because if you think about it, what were they saying? Oh, Abraham was not the father. Avimelech impregnated Sarah because Abraham was way too old. Now, what's the logical question on that rumor? The logical question on the rumor is, 1 minute, you're admitting that Sarah's the mother, right? Because everyone saw she gave birth. There were witnesses to that, right? How old was Sarah? She was 90. So if Abraham can't give birth at 100 to a father or son, well, how could Sarah give birth to a child at 90? Clearly, this is a miracle. So if Sarah could give birth at 90, then surely Abraham can do it at 100. You could even say it's a bigger miracle for a woman at 90 to give birth than for a man at 100. But once again, when people are looking to mock and to ridicule and to have sarcasm and fun at other people's expense, it doesn't matter if it's true or false. That's not what they're interested in. They're interested in enjoyment, of entertainment, of laughing at others, which is pretty sad. So therefore, it doesn't even have to be something that makes any sense. But here's one thought to take it a little deeper. Usually, a child resembles the parents. Why did it take a special miracle to make Isaac look like his father? Wouldn't he naturally look like his father? And Chassidut, Jewish philosophy, explains that Abraham and Isaac and then Jacob represent three different characteristics. And this is a long subject about Kabbalah and the composition of the human soul. But there's chesed, which is kindness, and then there's gevurah, which is strength and severity. Abraham was the manifestation of chesed, always inviting people into his tent and guests. and Isaac was Gevura, strength. And because their souls were different, therefore their faces physically reflected different physical composition and attributes, because your physical manifestation is an expression of your inner soul. And because they had different souls, one was rooted in chesed, one was rooted in gvura, they looked physically, their physical appearance was different. And therefore it took a miracle for God to make Isaac be identical to his father, even though they had different characteristics, different attributes that they both had all the attributes, but he was primarily kindness and he was primarily strength and gevura. Therefore, the physical appearances were different. Their facial features were different, and it had to be changed to squash the rumors that were being said that Isaac was not the son of Abraham. And there's a term in the Talmud that says people who make fun of others and spread gossip and rumors, it's called mitkabed biklon chavero. You're gaining honor at the expense of someone else. You're gaining entertainment at the expense of someone else. When you put someone else down, it's to inevitably make yourself look better. It's like patting yourself on the back, but you don't want to pat yourself. You're not going to sing your own praises. So by putting someone else down, in comparison, you make yourself look better. But there's one other interpretation to this verse, and that is that, sometimes you have parents who are very proud of their kids, and they walk around extolling the virtues of their kids. They're very proud. And sometimes the child could be more prominent than the parent. You ever hear people say, well, I'm known as the father of so-and-so, or as the mother of so-and-so. In other words, my child is the famous one, and I'm just have the honor of being their parent. And then you could have the reverse. You could have a child who isn't very, important, or hasn't achieved any great recognition or accomplishment, but his father, his mother is very good. So, oh, that's my father, that's my mother, and they talk about their parents. Blessed is the family that each one, the parent is proud of who the child is, and the child is proud of who the parent is. So in other words, Isaac said, I'm the son of Abraham. And Abraham said, I am the father of Isaac. Each one reflected the greatness of the other and basked in the glory and in the honor of the other, because both of them were of noted importance and accomplishment. So that is the opening verse, the story of Isaac. And what does it begin by telling us? If you remember last week, Isaac married Rebekah. There was an intermediary. There was Eliezer, the servant who went to the well, and the girl who was so kind to draw water, not just for Eliezer, the servant, but for the camels, would be the one who would marry Isaac. So they get married, and when Isaac got married, he was 40 years old. But for the first 20 years of his marriage, Rebekah and Isaac could not conceive a child. And so the opening of the Parsha describes husband and wife, Isaac and Rebekah, praying to God to grant them a child. And what happens? Their prayers are answered. And suddenly Rebekah gets pregnant, but she's feeling tremendous agitation in her womb, as something's going on in her womb that she doesn't understand, because there's this turmoil, this inner conflict going on in her womb, and she doesn't know what's going on. And Rashi says when she would pass the study hall, the baby would kick to get out, and when she passed the place of idolatry, the baby would kick to get out. She said, what's with this baby? One day he wants to go to the synagogue, one day he wants to go to a house of idolatry. So she goes to inquire in the home of Shem ve'Ever, which is the study hall at the time from the great rabbis who had prophetic vision, and said, what's going on? There was no ultrasounds then, so she couldn't take an ultrasound. So she asks the great sages, what is going on in my womb? Why am I feeling all this turmoil? Why am I feeling this tension going on in my womb? And here they reveal to her, guess what? You have twins in your womb, 2 different children. And the 2 of them are going to take divergent paths. And 2 different nations will emerge from your womb. And furthermore, the might will pass from one to the other, from one regime to the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. This is the prophecy she gets. And we all know what happens. Sure enough, she has twin boys, Jacob and Esau. And Jacob becomes the father of the Jewish nation, carries on the legacy of his grandfather Abraham and his father Isaac and his grandmother Sarah and his mother Rebecca. And Jacob and his wives father the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 sons. On the other hand, Esau is a wayward son who rebels against his parents and ultimately leaves the Jewish path and becomes the nation of Rome that destroyed the temple and were at war and at odds with the Jewish people. So this was the prophecy that was foretold when these two babies were in the womb. And right here, this tremendous, powerful lesson, because this is the first set of twins born in the Torah. And with twins, you can see, here you have two children. They grew up in the same home with the same set of parents. Not only that, they shared the same womb. So they were born at exactly the same time. Sometimes you have two kids that are different. You say, well, this one was born at this stage of the parent's life. This one was born at a different stage. They may be parented different at different stages of their life. But here they came into the world at the identical same time and shared the same home and the same parents and the same environment and the same set of circumstances. And yet they took completely different paths. So it goes back to the whole question of nature and nurture. Are your children shaped by the way you nurture them, by the way you raise them, or is it already innate, inborn in their nature, in their DNA, who they're going to be? And obviously it's a combination. I'm sure when you look at your children, if you have children, you see the difference between different natures of different children. And there's certain things that are beyond your control. It's the nature of the child. On the other hand, of course, the way you nurture a child has a big effect on the child and how they channel the nature that they have. But, sometimes a child doesn't always turn out the way the parents want them to turn out. A child could be a disappointment. Esau was a terrible disappointment to his parents, no question. But it sort of shows us that you could have the most wonderful parents like Isaac and Rebecca, and yet they could have a child that is beyond their control, the path and the choices that they make in life. And it's most illustrated with these two sons. And this is what the story of the Parsha is going to be about, the conflict, the rivalry between these two brothers, which continues today. You could say it's a little bit better because, we think of Christianity. Ishmael was the father of the Muslim world, the Arabs. And Esau is the progenitor of, Edom, which is Rome, which is the birth of Christianity. So today, I would say overall, our relationship with the Christians is much, much better than it was in the past. Of course, we had the Crusades and we had the Inquisitions and we had, even during the Holocaust, the church supporting Hitler to some degree. But today, our relationship with Christians overall, the descendants of Esau, is far better. And there are some Christians that are very supportive of Israel and friends of Israel and of the Jewish people. Not all, but many. On the other hand, the descendants of Ishmael are proving to be a source of danger and threat to the Jewish people, especially, not that, of course, with the Abraham Accords, there's some positive news, but Iran and other countries like that, Palestinians and all the terrorist organizations and so on and so forth. So these two brothers are at odds with each other. And here's a pivotal story that happens. Jacob came out the second child, which means that Esau is technically the firstborn. He's the heir, he's the inheritor. But Jacob wanted to be the firstborn. And one day, a rabbi say it was that Abraham had passed away and they came back from the funeral of Abraham. And the custom is when you come back from a funeral, the mourners eat round foods because round foods have no opening. So it's like no mouth that they can't speak. and it represents the circle of life, sadness and joy, all intermingled, going around and around. So they came back and they were eating lentil soup. And actually, Jacob, the grandson, was preparing lentil soup for his family, especially his father, mourning the passing of his grandfather, Abraham. And who walks in from the field? Esav. Esav didn't even bother going to his grandfather's funeral. He was busy hunting that day. Today you say he was out having a round of golf. He had more important things to do than go to his grandfather's funeral. And he comes in and he sees the hot lentil soup on the stove. And he literally says to his brother, let me have some of that hot, delicious soup. And he says, pour it down my throat. Halatani enough in this delicious red lentil stuff, this red soup, because I'm exhausted. And Jacob says, okay, I'll give you the soup on condition that you sell me your first birthright, your firstborn entitlements, the privilege of being the firstborn. Now, this is a very important story because we'll now understand why later it is Jacob that gets the blessings of the firstborn from his father rather than Esau. And Esau's response, I'm going to quote it to you. He says, behold, I am going to die anyways. What do I need this birthright for? Meaning, being a birthright is a spiritual privilege. And I don't need it because life is short. And let me just enjoy the bowl of beans of soup right now. And this is a classic example of the difference that our rabbis point out between the Esau mentality and the Jacob mentality. Because the truth is, just like Rebecca carried both children in her womb, we all possess both personality traits. Esau is the personality trait that wants immediate gratification and pleasure, doesn't think long term. Right now, there's a bowl of beans, hot soup I can enjoy. I'm not going to worry about what's going to be down the road. On the other hand, Jacob is the one who thinks about long-term ramifications and benefits. And Esau is willing to sell his birthright for a bowl of beans, as opposed to Jacob, who understands that you have to think about the long-term benefits of what really matters spiritually. Because every decision we make, or many decisions we make, I should say, is a question between the Esau mentality or the Jacob mentality. Do I want to do what's good for myself in the long run, in the long term, for my spiritual well-being, and sometimes even my physical well-being, or do I want the momentary instant pleasure? We all know the Esau mentality. We have a saying that people say, eat, drink, and be merry, because tomorrow you may die. That's a direct quote of Esau. Esau says, I'm going to die anyways. What do I need the birthright? I'll take a bowl of soup. It's interesting that we also have an expression, when we talk about something that's worthless, we say a bowl of beans. It's worth a bowl of beans, right? Well, this was the bean soup that Esau got in return for the birthright. And he sold his birthright for what? A bowl of beans. And fair and square, Jacob gives him the bowl of beans, and they make this transaction. Now, I want to point out something interesting the rabbis point out. When he comes in, he says, give me some of this hot soup, pour it down my throat. Why? Because I am exhausted. Now, what should he have said? He should have said, give me some of this soup because I am famished, I'm starving, I'm hungry. He doesn't say I'm hungry, he doesn't say I'm starving, he says I'm exhausted. Well, exhaustion, you go get a bed and you take a nap. Why is he saying he needs to eat? Because he's exhausted. And it's fascinating that we all know there's two types of eating. There's eating because you're hungry, and sometimes you eat not because you're hungry, but because you're emotionally exhausted. Sometimes you eat, they call it emotional eating, right? Because you're trying to numb some empty feeling of unhappiness or stress or unease. And so you try to assuage it with food. Esau had a life that was meaningless. He had a life without any spiritual content or fulfillment or happiness or, spirituality. And so he says, I'm exhausted, meaning I'm emotionally exhausted. I'm spiritually exhausted. And therefore, let me have this hot soup. He's looking for any pleasure to distract him, to be able to divert his attention from the emotional emptiness that he feels as a result of the life style and pursuits that he was leading. So he gives him the bowl of soup, and Jacob says, swear to me that you're selling this birthright to me. He gives him an oath that he's selling it to him. And then Jacob gives him not only the lentil soup, but he gives him bread to eat and drink. And then it says he ate, he drank, he got up. And then the conclusion of the verse says, Esav spurned the birthright. Now, if you read the verse literally, there's two ways to understand the verse. One way is that, by selling the birthright for a bowl of beans, he spurned it. But the other way to look at it is, no, after he ate it and drank and he sold it, sometimes you go in for a momentary pleasure and then you regret it later, right? Like, why did I do that? So now after he did that, he had regrets. Did I really give up the birthright for a bowl of beans? So now you know what he does? He starts to spurn the birthright. He starts to belittle it and minimize it, to rationalize in his own mind what he just did by saying, it's a worthless, meaningless thing. Who needs it anyways? And so he started to talk down the birthright just because he had to justify what he had just done, which is sold the birthright for a bowl of beans. That's episode 1, chapter 25 of this week's Torah portion. Now we come to another major event in the Parsha. And this is the conflict between Isaac. Okay, we're putting aside the children, Jacob and Esau. We're going back to Isaac, the main character of the Torah portion. And here we see, this is one of the main stories in the Torah about Isaac. There are a lot of stories, as I said, about Abraham, a lot of stories about Jacob, and not that many about Isaac. And this is one of the pivotal stories. And it's going to tie into what I said earlier, that Isaac's main role is to carry forth and maintain, in life, sometimes maintenance is harder than beginning something new. If somebody goes on a diet, sometimes they're very successful, they lose a lot of weight, but then maintaining it could be harder. Sometimes a beginning could be easier in some ways because there's the excitement of doing something new, but then continuing it could be more difficult, right? There's a lot of excitement in starting something, but there may not be as much excitement in continuing it. And Isaac is the continuity of his father and mother. And here we come to this incredible story, which is described in the Torah in great detail. And that is a conflict between a man by the name of Avimelech, who's the king of a place called Gerar. And first he confiscates Rebecca, abducts her, just like Abraham's wife is abducted. They always went, abducted beautiful women. But then he gives Isaac back his wife. But the main episode is that the land of the Philistines was a land that belonged to Abraham. Abraham had settled here. And Abraham, during his lifetime, had dug wells in the land. And the Philistines came along, and it's not the Palestinians that we know today. It's a different nation. They're not descendants. The Palestinians are not descendants of the Philistines, although they like to say that, to claim they have rights to the land, but they came much, much later, obviously, the Palestinians. And what happens? They want to erase any memory, any trace of Abraham's rights to the lands. You know what they do? They start sealing up the wells that Abraham dug. Isaac sees the way they're closing up, they're stuffing up the wells of his father. So he starts to undig those wells again. And once again, they seal off the wells a second time. And he digs it up a second time. And then a third time, they close up the wells. And once again, he undigs it. And finally, at the 7th go-around, they make peace, because 3 wells they dug, closed, and 3 wells he undug. But then by the 7th one, they made peace. And they made peace, and they name it the 7th well, Be'er Sheva, the 7th well. And till today in Israel, there's a city called Be'er Sheva, right, in the Negev. It's this city where the wells were dug, where Abraham was, and Isaac redug his father's wells. Now, why do we have this whole story about digging wells, and it's such great land? Because it illustrates what we're saying, that Isaac was there to maintain and carry on his father's legacy. And he shows tremendous persistence in not being deterred to stand up for his father's, historic ties to the land of Israel by challenging the Philistines and undigging time and again. And it took 3 go-arounds till they made peace finally at the 7th well. And once again, Isaac shows us that we have to, be able to carry forth and persist in maintaining the legacy, the past of our ancestors. And even if it means showing tremendous persistence in going up against the Philistines, Isaac does that, and he does it successfully. On a deeper level, this whole story of the wells has a very important lesson to all of us, and that is that there's a lot of story of wells in the Torah, as we know. We just had recently, Rebecca met Isaac at the well, found the bride for Isaac at the well. Moses is going to meet his wife at the well in the book of Exodus. And this whole idea of digging wells is the whole idea of every person, a well is a metaphor. We all have reservoirs within ourselves of fresh water, which is our spiritual entity, our soul. But sometimes it's covered up with layers of dirt, just like the wells are covered up. And the idea of being a well digger, Isaac's primary vocation here is being a well digger. Being a well digger means uncovering or tapping into our inner, deeper strength that we all possess. And just like when you dig for a well, you know that if you at it and you persist, you will strike water. Sometimes you'll strike oil, or sometimes you'll strike gold or diamonds. But beneath the surface lies so many treasures. But it's covered with dirt. If you look at the earth, you just see the dirt. But if you could see beyond the dirt and the filth, and you could discover the inner dimension that's in the earth, which is the fresh living waters. And so too within ourselves, we have to believe that we all have those wells within ourselves, those reservoirs of untapped potential and fresh waters. But like Isaac, we have to be well diggers. We have to persist in digging. And even if different forces come and close it up through whatever negative influences conceal and block the flow of the water, we have to believe it's there. And I think this is, I mentioned, some of you may have seen the videos during the week that I went on Sunday night to the convention of Chabad rabbis in New York City, over 5,000 rabbis. And, the Rabbi passed away 30 years ago. And one of the figures that was pretty astonishing was that when the Rabbi died, when the Rabbi passed away 30 years ago, there were 1,200 Chabad centers worldwide, 1,200, which he built over 45 years. Now, 1,200 centers of Judaism is quite an accomplishment, right? But when the Rebbe died, many people said, that's it. The movement is going to flounder now. It's going to collapse. It's going to close up, because how could it be sustained with the Rebbe not being here physically? Well, they announced that, if I recall correctly, the figure, there are about 4,800 Chabad centers worldwide now, which means it quadrupled. In 30 years, it quadrupled from what the Rebbe built in the first 45 years. But either way, what was this built on? When the Rebbe started this idea of sending his emissaries out to remote communities, it was this idea that if you look at a Jew and the Jew doesn't look remotely interested in Judaism, he or she is secular, alienated, distant from Judaism, there's 2 ways to look at that Jew. One way is, all I see is earth. I don't see any spirituality. I don't see the living waters. I don't see their connection to Judaism. So last night I was invited to someone's house for a meeting, a Jewish person in town. When I went out, I noticed there's no mezuzah on the door. So there's 2 ways you can do it. You can say, okay, he's obviously not interested in Judaism. He doesn't want to have a mezuzah. Or you can say, of course he wants to have a mezuzah. He doesn't know what a mezuzah is. Nobody ever taught him. Nobody ever showed him. So it's my job to go back to him with a beautiful mezuzah and say, hey, let's put a mezuzah on your door. And guess what? If he says to me, no, I'm not interested in having a mezuzah on my door, right? They're like the Philistines. They cover up the water. They want to deny there's water, right? Am I going to believe him? Of course not. It's his evil inclination or it's assimilation or whatever that caused him to think he doesn't want a mezuzah. But deep down, his soul wants a mezuzah. Every Jewish soul wants a mezuzah. So I have to start digging a well. I have to start trying to break through to his inner core. I have to learn with him Torah. I have to inspire him. I have to invite him to a Shabbos meal. I have to invite him to the synagogue till his water will be revealed that he wants a mezuzah on his door. Because it's like saying there's no water underneath the earth. That's insane. Of course there's water. You just have to find the right location. And then you have to drill down. And if you dig deep enough, you'll strike the water. Same thing with a Jewish soul. The Rebbe's philosophy was like Isaac. Every Jewish soul has living waters, meaning connection to God. Sometimes the soul is very disguised, very concealed, very hidden. But if you find the right way to talk to that Jew or connect with that Jew or inspire that Jew, it's like the well. You have to find the right location. Then you have to dig down. And you, like Isaac, with persistence and perseverance, you'll strike the water. And the Rebbe proves so correct. There's a reason why there are almost 5,000 Chabad centers. And I'm a disciple of the Rebbe. I'm his student. Dini and I came to Palm Beach because we were inspired by the Rebbe's message that every Jew is waiting for Torah. Every Jew is waiting for Yiddishkeit. Every Jew wants to have a connection with God because God is his spiritual state. His soul is a part of God. How could he not want to have a connection, or she not want to have a connection with God? If they don't appear that way, like the surface that doesn't show the water, it's just because there are other layers that have covered up the true identity of the Jew. And your job is to dig the well, to reveal it. And that's the story that is the focal point, really, of this week's Torah portion. The main story is of Isaac digging the wells, and it's one of the most famous stories of Isaac, but it represents this idea of the continuity of the Jewish people. And we know in the Jewish world today, one of the biggest conversations that goes on in every Jewish organization is what? Jewish continuity. It's the biggest struggle we're facing today. How do we maintain Jewish continuity? How do we make sure that subsequent generations carry on our heritage and beliefs and traditions? And Isaac is the paradigm for a child who maintains and says, no, I will not allow the Philistines to uproot our connection to the land of Israel. And today we have the same challenge. The Philistines of today, which is not just the Palestinians, but all the forces working against Israel, BDS movement and all the anti-Israel movements, they're trying to say, we don't have a connection to the land of Israel. Just like the Philistines were saying to Isaac, your father has no roots here. And they're closing up the wells. And we have to redig those wells and say, no, this is where our ancestors were. This is our land. This is our country. And what's very interesting about the story is that sometimes the hatred against Jews is so deep that, like the expression, cut your nose to spite your face. Like when you dig up a well in your country, you're denying water to your own people. But their desire to uproot any trace of Jews from their land overrode their interest in gain of having fresh water for their citizens. And that's something that we see today as well, that many Arab countries and their hatred, they could benefit so much by recognizing Israel, but because they refuse to recognize Israel, they're willing to allow their people to suffer and not receive the benefits of having a recognition of the land of Israel. So that is another major chapter 26 of the Parsha. But clearly the highlight of this week's Torah portion, which is really the big story, as we should say, in this Parsha, and we'll just do it a little briefly because I want to talk about Thanksgiving, is what I would call the switcheroo. Now, basically, Isaac is blind. He's on his deathbed, and he wants to bless his oldest son, Esav. Now, Esav was an imposter. He pretended to be a righteous son. He tricked his father. His father was blind, so he was able to deceive his father. And what happened was, Isaac says to his son, Esav, go prepare me a meal, and I'm going to give you a blessing before I die. And what happens is, Rebecca overhears the words of her husband, Isaac, to Esau saying, go prepare a meal and I will bless you. And Isaac is about to go bless his son Esau. And Rebecca realizes, like a Jewish mother, that this would be a terrible mistake if Esau received the blessings, because she knew one, and that's what the Torah tells us, that Rebecca loved Jacob, Isaac loved Esau. Esau was blind, he was easily deceived by his son. And so here's the famous story of Rebecca saying to Jacob, go quickly before your brother gets back from the field, from his hunting trip, from getting an animal to prepare for your father and get the blessings, and you go get the blessings from your father. And there's a lot of commentary on this story that I don't know how much we could unpack, but basically you have a son who says to his mother, Mom, what if Dad realizes I'm tricking him, that I'm not really Esau? And instead of blessing me, he curses me. And his mother, Rebecca, says, then the curse shall come upon me. And she encourages her son to go disguise himself and dress himself up like Esau. And Esau was a very furry, hairy guy, so she had to put sheepskin on him, goat skin, I should say. And he goes in with the food that the mother prepared for dinner for his father. And he says, you don't sound like my son Esau, the way you talk with such politeness, with such respect. Come here, let me feel your hand. And he feels his hand, and it feels furry, feels hairy like Esau. And Isaac, who's blind, says the famous words. He says, the voice is the voice of Jacob. You sound like my son Jacob, but your hands are the hands of Esau. But ultimately, he goes ahead and blesses Jacob, and Jacob gets the blessings. And when Esau realizes that his brother tricked him out of the blessings, or stole the blessings from him, he swears revenge. And at the end of the Parsha, Jacob has to run away from the land of Israel to go to his uncle Laban's house. His mother says, go to the house of my brother Laban in Haran and stay there till the anger of your brother subsides and recedes. And this is, like I said, a story for the ages, because ultimately the mother's intuition knew that the blessing had to go through Jacob, that if it would have been given to Esau, it would have been squandered. The spiritual strength of the Jewish people would have been lost, and it had to be preserved, maintained, and transmitted through Jacob to the 12 tribes, and she succeeds. But there's a price that's paid, and I can't get into all the commentaries, but something to continue studying this week. There's a lot of commentary on it. I'm just piquing your interest. But this is, again, all the stories of the Torah are practical stories. And this is a question in life. What happens if you have two children or more than two children? And one child proves to be responsible and good-natured and obedient and respectful. And one is a little bit wayward, a little bit rebellious, a little bit off the proper path. And of course, you love all your children. You don't want to lose any of your children. You don't want to alienate all of your children. But if you give the child that's irresponsible control, to think today in material terms, let's say a father has an estate or a business, and he has to appoint a child to be the executor of the estate, to handle things responsibly, or to run the business after he's gone, and make sure all the siblings get what they need to get. And the oldest child, who happens to be biologically the oldest, is not trustworthy to do that. The father doesn't feel that this child will do the responsible thing. He feels he'll cheat his other brothers. He'll ruin the business. He's just impulsive and irresponsible and not credible, and so on and so forth. So he wants to bypass the older child to give it to the next child. But then he's afraid he'll lose his relationship with his oldest child. So there's that struggle here between the father and the mother. What's the right thing to do? Isaac wants to give it to the oldest child. He still has hopes that maybe Esau will come back. Esau won't be lost to the Jewish people. That maybe if he shows him love and he embraces him, he'll return. So he's still investing in him, so to speak, trying to give him the blessings. And Rebecca is basically saying, cut your losses. Esau is a good for nothing. He's never going to amount to anything. If you give him these blessings, it's going to be lost. Let's give it to the right child. And there's a lot of commentary on the relationship between Isaac and Rebecca and how they handled it. And there's a lot of interesting explanations and theories, but you could definitely see the dynamic in a family where parents are at odds with each other, because here a husband and wife have a different view. Isaac clearly wants to bless Esau, and Rebecca says, no, we got to give it to Jacob. So you see the parents having a disagreement, and it's a very practical question of how to deal with children where one child outshines the other, and one child is not deserving of certain things. But if you don't give it to them, they may be offended and may be hurt, and he may not treat his brother properly. And unfortunately, these types of scenarios play themselves out in modern families all the time, unfortunately, among siblings and inheritances and so on and so forth. Just here, we're talking about just much more than a physical inheritance. We're talking about a spiritual inheritance, but also physical blessings. And ultimately, Isaac gives all these blessings to his youngest son, Jacob, thinking that he's giving it to Esau. But then later you see, when he discovers the ruse, he confirms his blessing. He doesn't retract it because he ultimately knows he did the right thing. It was by God, it turned out designed that he should end up giving the blessings to Jacob. So again, much more to discuss, but we'll try to pick it up on Shabbos. But just a thought about Thanksgiving. I don't have to tell you that Thanksgiving is one of the most important Jewish principles. The first prayer we say upon awakening every morning is Modani Lefanecha, give thanks to you, God, Melech Chai V'Kayim, eternal and living God and King, that you return my soul to me with compassion, great as your trust in me. So we begin our day with the word Modeh, I give thanks. We as Jews are called Yehudim, Jews, from the word Judah, the tribe of Judah. Why? Because when Judah was born, his mother said, I will give thanks to God, and therefore I name him Yehudah, which means thankfulness. So our collective name of Jews is based on the fact that we are a people that show gratitude, like Leah showed gratitude and thanks to God when she had the child Leah. But here there's a very deep insight into what Thanksgiving is really all about, and that is from the Jewish perspective. Why did Leah wait for her fourth child to name him Judah? She had a first child, Reuven, then Shimon, then Levi, and only the fourth child does she name Judah. I will give thanks to God. And she said, this time I'm going to give thanks to God. Why didn't she thank God for her first child, for her second child, for her third child? Why wait till the fourth? Wouldn't a mother be grateful for the first child, the second, and the third? Why does the fourth child only get the name, I give thanks to God, Yehudah, from the word hoda'ah, gratitude, acknowledgement, thankfulness, thanksgiving. So when you read the Torah, which will be next week's Torah portion, we know what happened. Jacob, in the end of this week's Parsha, runs away to find refuge from Esau. He goes to the house of his uncle Laban, Rebekah's brother. There he falls in love with Rachel. He wants to marry Rachel. He goes to her father Laban and says, I want to marry your daughter Rachel. Laban says, okay, but you're going to have to work 7 years for me. If you work 7 years, you can marry her. So he works 7 years, but then on the night of the wedding, Laban tricks him by sending the older sister Leah, saying, oh, we can't give the younger daughter before the older daughter. And now he has to work an additional 7 years to marry Rachel. But now he's married to two women, which wasn't uncommon then. One that he loved and always wanted to marry, and one that he got stuck with, that he was forced and tricked into marrying. And by the way, our rabbis say he tricked his father, now he was tricked. What goes around comes around, but that's a separate story. So, but then the Torah tells us very painfully in next week's Torah portion that Leah felt unloved by her husband, Jacob, because he never really loved her. He loved Rachel. And she was in a marriage with Rachel, who all of Jacob's affection was for Rachel. So what happens? She has a first child and she says, Reuben, God saw my plight, that I'm unloved in this marriage, and gave me a child. Now my husband will love me because I'm the father. I gave him a child. I made him a father. I'm the mother of his child. But unfortunately, the marriage doesn't get any better. There's still no love between Jacob and Leah. So she has a second child. And she says, Shimon, God heard my plight, that I'm suffering, and gave me a child. Now my husband will love me. Still no love in the marriage. Now she has a third child. She says, Levi. Levi means attachment. Now my husband will attach himself to me because I gave him 3 sons. And Rachel doesn't have any children. But there's still no love in the marriage. So now when she has a fourth child, she says, you know what? This time around, I'm going to give thanks to God that I have this child. Why? What she was saying is something very deep and profound about Thanksgiving. She was saying is, up until now, I wasn't grateful for the blessing of a child because I was so fixated and focused on getting my husband's attention, love, admiration, and affection that every child I had, I was thinking, oh, well, maybe now I'm going to get the love I wanted and desire in my marriage. By the fourth go-around, she said, you know what? I don't know what's going to be with my marriage. I don't know, maybe my husband will never really love me properly. But you know what? I'm not going to allow what I don't have to deprive me of the blessings I do have. I'm not going to allow what's lacking in my life to cause me to not appreciate and enjoy what I do have. And therefore, instead of focusing on my bad marriage, I'm going to say, now I will give gratitude to God that I have this child. And that's why we're called Jews, Yehudim, because in life, very few people have everything going for them. Most people have things that are good and things that could be better. But the question is, if you're only focused on what's missing in your life, like the missing tile syndrome, it could be 99 tiles that are good in your roof. One tile's missing, that's the one you keep on looking at, right? But if you have to do whatever you can to make things better, but if you can't, you have to be able to still focus on all the good and not wait till everything's perfect in your life, and then you'll be grateful. Because if you wait for everything to be perfect, you may never be grateful, but rather to see the good. And just last week, I spoke about a very powerful example. In my video, I saw this podcast with this girl called Rivka Shaktin. If you want to look it up and watch it, it's an hour long. There's a podcast called Meaningful People. And they interviewed this 16-year-old girl who was in a skiing accident at the age of 15. And she's now paralyzed. She severed her spinal cord from her chest down. She is paralyzed and she will never walk again unless there's a miraculous cure or a miracle that allows her to walk. 16-year-old beautiful girl confined to a wheelchair on a skiing accident. And she talked about how for a year she went through rehab, but she went to shul this year, Rosh Hashanah, for the first time. And the interviewer, a religious guy, says to her, what was it like being in shul for Rosh Hashanah for the first time? And I watched this, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She said, oh, it was so inspiring, so meaningful to be back in shul the first time after my accident in a wheelchair in shul on Rosh Hashanah. And she said, I felt so much gratitude. And the interviewer said, what do you mean by gratitude? Like, you're paralyzed for life. You're in a wheelchair, you'll never walk again. Like, why did you feel gratitude in the synagogue? And she said, I was this close from getting killed. Like, it's a miracle that I survived that accident. My helmet was cracked. I could have not survived. But furthermore, she said, I was this close from being paralyzed from my neck down, which means I wouldn't have the use of my hands. And she waves her hand. She says, hands are really, really great. Hands are really important. And so she's saying, thank God, Hashem, that you only took my legs, but at least I have my hands, because how much worse would it be if I was paralyzed and I couldn't even use my arms? How miserable I would be. And thank God I'm even alive. And she really taught me this idea that no matter how bad things are, to have the ability to say, okay, God took my legs for me, but I still have hands. I should be grateful. And to acknowledge every detail, of your blessings and appreciate everything. I have eyes, I have ears, you go through your body and think of all the things that work and be grateful for each one individually. And like Leah, even though many things in her life, or at least the primary thing, the love of her husband, was absent. She had beautiful children, but not a loving husband. She was able to, at the fourth child, say, you know what, I'm going to stop focusing and obsessing on what I don't have, what I can't control. It really goes back to the serenity prayer. God, give me the courage to change the things I can change in my life. Give me the serenity to accept the things I can't change. And give me the wisdom to know the difference. Leah gets that wisdom at the fourth child. And she realizes, you know what, I can't change my husband. I can't make him love me. I'm in a bad situation. My father, Laban, sent me down the aisle to marry a man who never wanted to marry me. And I'm stuck in this marriage. But I do have 4 beautiful children. This time I'm going to give gratitude to God. And that's the idea. Yes, we always have to be grateful, but not only grateful when everything's going well in our lives, even when things are still not yet going well. We should always be optimistic and work towards making things better. But we should never allow what we don't have to deprive us of appreciating and seeing the good in what we do have. So with that in mind, that is the Jewish perspective of Yehudah and why we collectively are called Jews, Yehudim. And that's why the first prayer every morning that we say is a blessing or a prayer of thanksgiving to God. The first words out of our mouth are words of gratitude.
Hi everyone. Unfortunately, the rabbi just called me and told me he lost power, but he said he was almost done. So he wanted me to tell everybody goodbye and have a happy Thanksgiving and looking forward to a good week. Okay? Thank you so much. Bye bye.